Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of Planning Committee A. I'm Councillor Johnny Crawshaw. I'm the chair of this committee. On my left is Gareth Arnold, who is the Development Manager. To the left of Gareth is Mark Baldry, who's the Principal Development Project Officer. And to the left of Mark is Sharon Jackson, who's the Planning Officer. On my right is Ange Bealby from Democratic Services. To the right of Ange is Sandra Brannigan, who's the senior lawyer. And to the right of Sandra is Jodie Ingram, who's a second lawyer today. Down either side of the committee, we have all the members, either side of the committee, down either side of the tables, we have all the members of the committee. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. If I can just ask everybody to make sure your mobile phones are either turned off or on silent. And if I can remind anybody who's speaking today, if you can just make sure that you speak clearly straight into the microphone. The acoustics in this room are not fantastic, and likewise for people listening online, it's helpful if we can make sure everyone can follow the proceedings today. For members of the public, there are toilets through the door behind you, and you're welcome to use them at any point during today's meeting. Obviously, members of the committee need to be at the table throughout the hearing today. In terms of how today's meeting will run, these are business meetings of the council that are held in public rather than public meetings. So we have very discrete parts of the meeting where there is public participation. We do have some people who are wishing to speak today, so I'll invite you up to the table at the appropriate points, but there are no other sections where there will be any public participation during the meeting. We may need to take adjournments today. If we take adjournments, if I can just remind everybody, members of the public, not to speak to members of the committee during the adjournment, and members of the committee not to discuss any aspects of the applications that we're hearing during those adjournments. In terms of the individual applications that we'll be hearing, just for the benefit of anybody who hasn't seen one of these meetings previously, the way we deal with the applications are as follows. I'll first of all invite the officers to speak through the plans. I'll then invite committee members to ask any questions or points of clarity on the plans that they've just seen. I'll then invite the planning officer to provide any updates on the report that members have all received. We'll then go to the public participation section, where any members of the public who've registered to speak can address the committee. There may be members of the committee who wish to ask questions of the public participant. Once those sections have completed, we then go to members' questions of the officers on any aspects of the report, the update, anything that's been raised during public participation. Once we've asked all the questions we want to ask, we move into debate. And once we've debated, we look to consider the officer recommendation first of all. So every application that we have comes with an officer recommendation. We always consider the recommendation first before deciding whether there's anything else that we wish to do with the application. I will be talking us through as we go through the meeting, so hopefully that will be clear to everybody. So moving on to the formal agenda then, I've received some apologies for absence. I've got apologies from Councillor Jane Burton, who's being substituted by Councillor Merritt, and from Councillor Fisher, who's being substituted today by Councillor Vassey. I'm noting that Councillor Watson is not currently here, so if he arrives before we begin an application, he can join the table. If it's afterwards, he'll just have to join at the next available item. Next on the agenda was declarations of interest. So if I can just invite anybody with a declaration, Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was at school. Ed Sykes was in my year, who's the applicant on the second application, and we do meet every couple of years for reunion. He's one of the regulars, as am I. So rather than risk the thousands of people watching on the webcast, seeing us in a pub and thinking there's something dodgy, I will leave for that application.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Stewart. And I will just note that Councillor Watson is arriving and is welcome to join the table. We haven't started any of the applications yet. No problem. We're just at declarations of interest if you have anything.
I do indeed.
In which case, if you just pop your microphone on when you sat down, and then you can give your interest as well.
A declaration in respect to the application concerning Piglets farm, in that I know the family who own the place.
That's fine, and I'm just checking that you're not considering that as a reason why you would need to withdraw.
I will withdraw.
You will withdraw from the meeting.
Yeah.
At that point. Okay, thank you. Okay, so agenda item 3 is public participation on the general remit of the committee. We don't have anybody registered under agenda item 3, so I can move us on to agenda item 4, which is the plans list. Before we start, eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that we don't currently have a vice chair. So I have invited Councillor Culwick if he would be prepared to be the vice chair for this evening's meeting, if everybody is happy for him to do so. I'm seeing lots of nods, and I assume you're happy to accept, Councillor Gulwick. Okay, so I can move us then on to the plans list, and agenda item 4A is the application for Eastfield 2800 Eastfield Lane, Dunnington, and I'll hand over to Gareth to talk us through the plans, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for the construction of 44 houses. Site off south to the south of Eastfield Lane. Planning permission was previously granted in 2022 on this land and also on the adjacent land for 83 houses. This application is just for part of the site, as I'll show on the presentation. The site is also part of housing allocation H31 in the adopted local plan, which shows the 2 fields with an estimated yield of 83 dwellings. Members will have picked up in the papers that the proposed widening of Eastfield Lane includes land which is within the greenbelt, the assessment of which is covered in paragraph 5.8 to 5.12 of the report. Otherwise, this site, as an allocated site, is not within the greenbelt. So, looking at the plans on the screen, site location plans. So, Eastfield Lane running broadly east-west across the top of the site, and this is land to the south on the eastern edge of Dunnington. Satellite image previous application also covered the land to the east, which is known as the Market Garden, and this also shows some of the papers referred to public right of way, public footpath, which runs along this line, curves north to meet Eastfield Lane on the southern side of the site. Housing allocation, field boundaries, you can see corresponding to the image you've just seen. And then the overview map Dunnington out with my cursor outlining the extent of the application before members. Proposed site layout. So a single road with a spur, which would give access to the development of the adjacent site. Areas of open space within the centre of the site and an area to the south. Some, but not necessarily all, of the housing types. Hadley stroke Archford semi shown because they form a pair at the entrance to the site. So you have a front door facing onto Eastfield Lane. Sorry, that would be the front. Yes, front door facing onto Eastfield Lane, and then the elevation of the adjoining property would face onto the access road into the site, and that's mirrored. And the other two properties fronting onto Eastfield Lane are these Bradgate house types, detached houses. Other typical properties, houses, 2-storey, semi-detached, 3-bedroom, 2-storey, detached. A block of 3. And then same house types, but shown as a block of 5. A landscape drawing. So this shows so tree planting along that access road. Just for members' information, so this is the original planning permission approved under that 2020 reference number. Broadly, the boundary followed that, the hedge line there. Again, that showed that single point of access onto Eastfield Lane, and then the road extending into the adjacent field, providing that 2 prongs of the fork. We'll go back to the layout plan. That's the end of the presentation.
Okay, so any questions just on points of clarity with the plans? Everybody happy that they understand the application in terms of its plan form? I'm not seeing any hands, so happy to go on to any updates that we might have had.
In terms of updates in respect of item 4A, on the additional information sheet, we've received an additional written representation from Councillor Waters, one of the ward councillors for Oswaldwick and Derwent. The points he raises are summarised within the paper that has been circulated, and then just a very brief update to the overall recommendation, where we now including an additional planning obligation in respect of securing the rest of the site and vehicular access. I'll let you read that and get up to speed with it.
Okay, thank you. Have members had time to read the update already, or do you want a moment to read? I think everybody's nodding, suggesting they've had time to see the update. So in which case I will take us on, and we don't actually have anybody registered to speak on this application, so I can go straight to members' questions. So this is questions from members to officers on anything within the report or within the update. So Councillor Merritt and then Councillor Ryan.
Thanks very much. Can I ask a question in terms of the affordable housing provision? The new local plan, policy H10, Roman sub-letter 1, where it specifies affordable housing is provided in accordance with table 5.4 as a minimum. Higher rates of provision will be sought where development viability is not compromised. Can I ask what efforts were made to see if we could secure higher, if it was viable in this particular case, please?
So we, in terms of the affordable housing provision, in terms of affordable housing provision, officers were satisfied that it was compliant with the relevant policy. So in terms of additional ask, we haven't asked for that, but
How can you say it's compliant if you haven't tested that particular part of the policy?
Is it? Copy of the plan would be very useful. Yes, right. And then well, my view is that this provides the whether it's a minimum target or not has been provided, then that makes it in accordance with the policy.
Okay, I hear what you say, but if we are also to achieve the target in policy SS1 of 45% of the 9,396 affordable housing requirement in the plan period, then we are going to have to achieve better than the minimum, at least in some cases. I'm not going to quibble about this particular one because it's a small site, and I suspect the viability probably isn't much different from the limit, but I'm just flagging the issue because if we are to achieve SS1, then when we deal with greenfield sites, generally, we're going to have to do better than the minimum.
Yeah, well, we have obviously we've brought forward sites which have provided more than the minimum. Windfall sites, for example, the New Lane site was 100% affordable, and the council's own schemes are brought forward, which all adds to that higher target of achieving 45% of the requirement. So it has been achieved in other locations. Hopefully that will add to that overall meeting that overall target.
Yeah.
We haven't sought any additional ask on this one.
Okay. I suspect if you tot up the totals of permissions and totals of affordable, given that we're now halfway through the plan, despite the recent extra affordable, we were probably off the target. It might be helpful if we can be updated on where we are against the target overall. Not now, but at an appropriate point in the not too distant future.
A very long time.
I think it's a very fair point that you make, and I think that it's probably something that would need to come through scrutiny as the appropriate place where that kind of information might be looked at. But I think the general principle, which is enshrined within the local plan, is that both the local authority and developers need to not look at the minimum line as the minimum that they should be delivering, but the absolute bottom threshold. And I think the plan is written in a way that actually the expectation is that where it's appropriate, sites will deliver more than that minimum 30% on a greenfield site. I think that's probably enough on that for this particular application, but I think it's a very fair point. Next on my list, I had Councillor Moroney.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm correct in saying that no request has been made for NHS contributions, and I wondered if the officers would like to comment. Thank you.
We haven't had any consultation responses from the NHS asking for a contribution on this application.
With your permission, Chair, could I ask who the request was sent to?
In terms of issuing a consultation response, it will have been a consultation request rather, that will have been sent to the named contact address that we have for the NHS.
Perhaps I could pick that up after the
ICB.
meeting, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And on this point, I think Councillor Eyre.
Yeah, just because it's something that I've kind of quite concerned about. Obviously, there have been significant cuts proposed from the government to the ICB, what they've labelled as back office staff. So are we having conversations, because they're faced, I think, I believe 50% cuts to their staff by Q3 of this year. So I have noticed that we were getting less and less responses from the NHS previously. Now they're facing 50% staffing reductions across their non-clinical staff. There probably isn't the capacity within those teams to answer these particular requests anymore. So that does flag a potential issue that we're going to sleepwalk into a lack of NHS contributions due to lack of capacity within the ICB. So I suggest that we maybe pick that up and have conversations with our colleagues to the place board as to how we stop that from happening.
I mean, again, I think that's probably one to take away, isn't it? Next on my list, I had Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. My questions relate to paragraph 5.21, public rights of way and sustainable travel. I'm just keen to find out that there's mention made of a Section 106 agreement, but no details are provided as to what this might be used for. So I was just wanting to get a clearer sense of this, because from a sustainable travel point of view, one might imagine that a public right of way at the southern boundary of this site might be adapted to provide easier cycle paths access into the village. So I'm wondering what has actually been discussed, and has the issue of using a Section 106 to enable cycling to take place formed part of discussions that are referred to in 5.21?
Can we just have the site plan back up, please?
Where the laser pointer is on the slide deck now, you'll see that the existing footpath runs to there's a tarmac footpath that runs along the properties to the southern end of Holly Tree Croft, which is the existing cul-de-sac. And then there's a sort of a radius curve round to the properties onto Curver Lane. That existing footway is tarmacked. The contribution secured for the public rights of way team in effect will facilitate the infilling of that, in effect create that sort of spur into a T shape, so it plugs into the footpath that will come to the to the site boundary that's part of the development, and then the contribution will in effect fill the last link and allow it to be connected into that existing route.
Sorry, so I understand, is the bottom left-hand corner of the development site, is that a footpath, cycle path actually envisaged there? Is that what's been put there?
Yes, yeah.
So it'll be able to cope with
Yeah.
bikes as well? Yes, okay, thank you.
Okay, next I had councillor Colwick.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the update to recommendation in the supplementary paper there, additional planning obligation, reference to construction of highway connections to an adoptable standard prior to the occupation of no more than 39 dwellings. I wonder why that particular figure. Is that an arbitrary figure? Is it a percentage? Is there some explanation as to why that figure rather than any other that would enable us to maybe see this in the context of other applications or other applications in the future in the context of this one?
So in terms of that particular figure, there is a degree of logic behind it, insofar as on the site in Weldrake that was also Barratt development, there was a similar obligation within their 106, and relative to the proportion of dwellings that the permission ran to, it was around the I think sort of 85, 80, high 80% level. So that's where that number's derived from, because it's a similar percentage rate that we would be applied here. And fundamentally, it's just ultimately that balance between sort of timing that obligation to sort of, I guess, try and as best we can ensure it's delivered. So, for example, if it was on the penultimate one, you know, there is potentially a bit more scope for sort of saying, oh, well, you know, we can't build the final one for argument's sake, whereas this is just sort of hopefully strikes that balance between delivering what we want to versus sort of the developer still having an interest in, you know, completing the development and getting it over the line.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, next I had councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to echo the sort of NHS point, which Councillor Maroney's asked the question before, I do find it quite weird. I mean, we've got 500,000 going for education, that the NHS can be so inefficient that they're not able to say, yes, we'd like to be interested in potentially applying for some money. These people clearly need to use the NHS, and that we then as a council don't follow it up in any way. I just find it really, really weird. The working hours is where my condition is, though. So on number 8, it says the conditions are, you know, 8 o'clock till 6 o'clock, Monday to Friday, and then less on a Saturday. Now, obviously, I appreciate these quite standard. So as a general sort of point, I do wonder if we are more generous with the hours than we need be, because I would say the vast majority of developers won't be working Saturdays, and they certainly won't be working until as late as 6 o'clock. And so we potentially could be tied. That's a general point. My question is, and I presume the answer is no, can we put in particular fines or particular penalties for developers breaching these conditions? Because that is as clear a condition as possibly can be. And there's 2 developments in Towthorpe at the moment, one of which is with Barratt that are doing this one. And the developers do just treat them with total contempt, and embarrassingly total contempt. You know, we've had 5 lorries lined up at the non-Barratt site within Towthorpe, and it's just so black and white. So at the moment, what we do across the council is we have a situation say you can't work before 8 o'clock, and then we say, well, somebody has worked before 8 o'clock, and we say, do not be naughty, do not do it again, and they do it again. We say, do not be naughty. So the particular question I've got is, can we have a particular clear penalty? We've got dash cam, we've got CCTV, we can see these breaches. If we had a particular penalty, it's £100 every time you breach it, like a fixed penalty note in a similar way, we get a lot less breaches.
No, I don't think we could do that. The planning enforcement regime, allows us to, serve breach of condition notices. If they breach conditions, which are straight to the magistrate's court, I believe, and require them to comply with those, that notice. If they breach the notice, it goes to the magistrate's courts. The magistrates have powers to levy fines or an enforcement notice. Again, if the enforcement notice, if they breach the enforcement notice, then that's a criminal offence that we can take to court. But to put particular fines within conditions, I don't think we have those powers. Those powers? No, we don't have those powers.
Chair, that's just to confirm what Gareth says. There is no statutory power. We have no power to levy a PCN for failure to comply with a condition, unfortunately.
Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, no doubt one for scrutiny then, but can we as a committee please be aware of just how meaningless these conditions are? How absolutely meaningless. You know, two I'm talking about, it's total contempt for it on a regular basis. And that is, if you're not going to stick to a condition about 5 HGVs parking a village, driving through a village, you know, you're not going to stick to some detail that's tucked away. I think we've got to get on top of it, and we're not doing.
I think that's probably as Gareth has said, that's an enforcement issue rather than something for this committee in terms of our conditions that we apply to applications. I would agree that there is always that question, isn't there, of you know, is a condition enforceable? And you know, that's something for us to think about. I don't think that we would be suggesting we shouldn't have that condition on here. I think the question is, how is it enforced? But I think in terms of what this committee's job is to do today with this application, we can only put the conditions on that we think are reasonable to do so. I think the point that you're making is one for planning enforcement and the way in which conditions on applications are enforced, rather than something for planning committee in terms of when we're making a determination on a specific application.
Yeah, I do agree. It's not about whether it can be enforced. It absolutely can be. And we're obviously told they have to be, amongst other things, necessary. And so we as a council need to get on top of this enforcement wise, because at the moment you've been naughty, don't be naughty again, repeated over, you know, several times. It's not a good way to do it.
So I would suggest that what you do is take that particular case and write to Councillor Pavlovic as the exec member with planning enforcement within his portfolio, and make the point that you have made very articulately here about enforcement. And I'm sure that you'll have cross-party support in terms of making sure that, or doing all that we can in terms of making sure that conditions are appropriately enforced. Councillor Vassie, is that supplementary on this? Yeah.
It is supplementary to that, Chair. Yes. In my ward, I've currently got a development being constructed where
I'm just going to interrupt a second, Councillor Vassie, just specifically. What I don't want to get into is a discussion around enforcement. That's not what we're here to do today. If it's a material to this application, I'm happy to take it.
Indeed, fine. So the problem is generators being left on all night. So my question to officers, is it useful, is it possible for us to add in these conditions specifics that relate to things like generators being left on all night, so that there's clarity for the developer as well as for anyone else as to what is permissible and what isn't?
It's probably something for the construction environment management plan. So
yes.
Condition 7 on this particular plan permission, starting on page 33 and finishing on page 35. Yeah, so there's I don't think it says anything about generators.
Covered under that.
I think it would be best covered under the construction environment management plan. And yeah, if members felt that it was, I mean, it's pretty much a standard condition. But if members felt that in circumstances we should be adding generators that perhaps need to be on all the time for whatever reason, then I don't think that would be unreasonable in that they can presumably they can have some sort of acoustic shrouding if necessary, if they are causing problems to amenity.
Okay, so it would be possible to add that. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, I did have Councillor Merritt down. Had you indicated for another question? Yes, Councillor Merritt again.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could comment on the provision for lifetime homes in this development, which is one of the things that we cover under policy H3 of the local plan. Proportion of housing meets the higher access standards of Part M of the building regs.
Just looking at the design and access statement.
Within the design and access statement, within the design and access statement, the applicant has stated that all the house types will be compliant with Part M of the building regulations.
Yeah, that's excellent news. Could I just ask a final question in terms of Councillor Waters' comments? I'm not going to ask about all of them, but I just wondered about the issue of timing of payments, because obviously there's a very substantial education payment. And as he says, you know, some sites we've had difficulties because of the timing of payments. And I can think of one rather large site in my ward where that's been an issue and led to a considerable hiatus in building out the whole site.
So in terms of the timings and the delivery of those obligations, fundamentally they are a negotiated agreement.
Yeah.
We have to strike the balance between, obviously, from our perspective, we want to secure the obligation and bring those in, but equally we have to be mindful of the fact that the applicant has their own economics and sort of cash flow considerations to take into account as well. In terms of this development, for their education, I would be very surprised if that payment wasn't phased. Typically we'll peg them to sort of a commencement and then perhaps a percentage of sort of 50 or 60%, because similarly the demand from the development doesn't all come at the start. So there can be advantages to us in terms of phasing that payment as well, because if we quite often there is a spend limit on them in terms of time frames. So it can be helpful to us if we can push it back a little bit to help and perhaps assist with education and their sort of timing of things.
Okay, and is that you?
And the other one off Mark's list I wondered about is the condition 9 about drainage once the development is complete, and querying what happens during the development process.
We don't get involved as an authority. It would be a requirement on the developer through, I guess, general, what do you call it, common law, that they didn't damage adjacent properties' boundaries. But yeah, building sites are muddy and they hold water. But I'm not sure we can. I'm not sure we can come to put a condition on that requires that to be managed through the planning process. We look at the final form of development. There's anything in the construction management plan. I can't see how we'd be able to cover that. All conditions, apart from the construction environment management plan, are about the final form of the development rather than managing the process. It's a relatively recent thing where we've got involved in the construction process through the planning system. And we do with larger sites, but there is a limit to what we can reasonably cover as the planning authority.
I think I'll just take the opportunity while we're discussing conditions and in particular the submission from Councillor Waters. Obviously he's raised a number of concerns about a number of conditions, some of which relate to the previously approved application. And I just want to make sure that we're satisfied. I think in particular he'd raised concerns about previously approved conditions not having been discharged, and what would that mean for this application if there were similar conditions. I just want to check that we're satisfied that we have appropriate conditions that can be discharged in a timely manner to facilitate the development of this site if it were to be approved. And that the lack of discharge of previous conditions doesn't necessarily prejudice anything to do with this application.
No, so with regard to the if you like, the first planning permission under the 2020 reference, that was granted, and it was subject to a series of pre-commencement conditions, a number of which haven't been formally discharged. That particular planning permission, from recollection, has weeks left to live on it. So certainly by, I think perhaps, I want to say possibly July time, that permission will fall away. So yes, in the context of they are two distinct applications, we are satisfied that the conditions can operate.
Thank you. Next on my list was Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and just commend the committee on the excellent decision they made on the previous meeting in terms of an application that was half of a site that's in the local plan. This is very different in terms of it's a much smaller one in terms of that. But as ever with planning, we have two versions of the truth in terms of what Councillor Waters has said as to why one side of the site is not being brought forward and what the report says in terms of one site being brought forward. Just seeking some level of clarity because it does raise concerns. So when we talk about affordable, for example, we would be looking at 30% across 80. I would not like to think that what they're trying to do is to bring 30% across 40 and then bring the next 40 on and say, oh, by the way, Councillor Waters was right. There's all this remediation work that needs doing. Therefore, there's no viability for affordability at all. So is there any assurance that you can give me that there isn't a workaround happening as to the reason why you would bring 40 rather than the full 80?
In terms of the comments that have been raised by Councillor Waters, I don't know the veracity of them as to whether there are contaminated land issues in the other half of the site. Our understanding as officers is that when the first application was considered under the 2020 reference, the two parcels of land that made up the site were under two separate ownerships. The ownership of the parcel that we're looking at within this current application, I believe, the land transfer or the sale proceeded as planned following the grant of that first planning permission. That's also reflected within the certificates that have been signed as part of the application form. The reason we are looking at this second application is because the deal or the agreement for the second half of the site has fallen away, and there is a dispute between the applicant and that landowner. Whether that second half of the site will come forward or not, we don't know. I don't believe, from the information I have, I don't believe it would be. I would be surprised it would be Barrett's bringing it forward. And as part of the design of this application, we've sought to try and keep that second half of the site open to with a view to ultimately wanting to deliver the whole of the housing allocation.
Very carefully answered. I think it still doesn't sort of get to the nux of the question. Is that there's probably a question for Sandra is, would it be a material consideration if we thought that those additional 11 affordable homes would be at jeopardy by granting two separate applications as a reason to refuse? And if so, what certainty can we gain as a committee that in granting this, we're not putting those 11, possibly more affordable homes at jeopardy?
I think you'd have to have grounds to be able to set out a refusal reason of what you thought why you thought it was being brought forward in a piecemeal fashion and how that would undermine delivery of the site overall. if I guess if there was contamination, have they done they've done a contamination assessment, have they not? They've done a contamination assessment, and that's not brought up anything. No, sorry, on the first application, there was a.
Yeah, so they had this. The conditions relating to contaminated land and remediation from the first application were discharged. So that the information that's been submitted by Barrett's was reviewed by Public Protection and deemed to be sufficient to discharge the pre-commencement conditions that required discharging. And in any event, there's always the watching condition over any unexpected land contamination.
But nothing came out of that that land contamination assessment over both parts of the site, which then led the developer to come back and say we need to renegotiate this planning permission.
As far as we are aware as officers, it's a land assembly issue.
So we have no evidence which suggests that it's being split artificially, and then the other side of the site will be brought forward with fewer contributions because of some issues that are going on that site. It doesn't mean it won't transpire. Where every site will have to be, every application will have to be considered on its merits. But what we have is we've got a site here which provides an access into the adjacent site, which allows it to be brought forward as one. But we will have to negotiate with whoever the new developers are on contributions, but they will be on the same basis as we've negotiated this one. The local plan policies that stand at the time.
I think in order to be defensible in our decision making, as a committee, we are obliged to assess the application that's before us with the information that we have available to us and the advice from officers. And I think that that's all that we can do. Whatever we may or may not speculate is behind the change of plans. I think that the question that I would just seek clarity, and I think you've already said so, but I think just to kind of, close the circle, as it were, is that, our officers, are you satisfied that you have got everything within this application and the conditions within this application to make sure that were it to be approved, it doesn't prejudice the future development of the second half of the site?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and that's the extra planning obligation set out in the update. So that the drawings already show that spur of the access road hitting the boundary with the adjacent sides. So in the fullness of time, that would be potential to become an adopted highway up to the boundary. So then allowing the developer of the adjacent site to plug into that. But as there is now an obligation that specifically requires them to do that.
I've got, in which case I'll put you on my list. I've got Councillor Stewart waiting, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Colwick. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I don't think there's anything about banning construction traffic from the village, is there? I mean, it talks about the development, the access being through Eastfield Lane. Am I right in thinking that? There's nothing, because if there wasn't anything, for me, that would be a reasonable condition. I'm thinking of, for example, lorries that were coming on the whole road. If we ban construction traffic through the village, they just go up to the roundabout and back along a sort of triangle. They had about 3 minutes of their journey and save a lot of vehicles going past the village, which has got a primary school and everything like that. It's 20 where it talks about Eastfield Lane and everything.
So, with regard to the, if you like, the sequencing of works and construction traffic, condition 19 requires a method of work statement, which will agree those matters with the applicant, and in conjunction, obviously, with colleagues in highways. So, yeah, initially there would be no reason for the traffic to come through the centre of the village.
I can give you a great example of where there's no reason at all for traffic to come through the village, but it does a lot very currently, but I won't go into the detail of that. I appreciate it gets taken, this is the problem with S106 is not being, the committee being after, but can we get it as a condition here rather than speculate about what may or may not be agreed to behind closed doors later?
Yeah, I've just asked Gareth, and I think it's potentially possible.
Well, it is-
Condition 19.
It is what would be discussed under condition 19. So that third, it's got a bullet point, but it's that third stick, the routing for construction traffic that will be promoted. So so that will be a discussion between highways officers and the developer about the route. And that will be so there will be a document that's kind of appended onto that planning condition.
So would it be reasonable to add something along the lines of, with that route to avoid access through the village of Dunnington wherever possible, or I don't know what would be the wording that would be appropriate to use there. I'll come to you, Councillor Stewart, just 1 second.
Yeah.
Reference to the road.
Yeah, it might be worth getting the map up, because if you look at it, it's incredibly black and white, that you could say no construction traffic through the village. Very, very straightforward. And that's what I'm asking. And if the committee members are minded to put that on, we can add that as a condition. Whereas obviously at the moment, as Gareth rightly said, it reads that a discussion would take place about whether that happens or not. My suggestion is that should happen. There's no reason why it can't. It's absolutely black and white. It's on the side of the village, and it just adds a couple of minutes onto certain lorries' journeys.
Richard, could you just put the projector on first?
So up church.
Yeah.
Oh,
Councillor Watson.
which makes sense.
Thank you. On that very point, rather than be negative in the description, it's probably far better to be positive and to say access shall be via the 166.
There was this with that.
Yeah, so with regard to the construction access, whilst the respective conditions weren't formally discharged off the first application, the broad sort of proposals within in seeking to discharge the equivalent condition first time round was that construction traffic would come from the A166, the Stamford Bridge Road, where the cursor is, come down Church Balk and then along Eastfield Lane, and this included reference to any traffic approaching York from the east, coming in along Hull Road at the other side of Dunnington, that traffic would go to the Grimston Bar interchange and use that to turn round and come back out the Stamford Bridge Road. So even whilst that condition wasn't formally agreed first time round, there was that awareness and sort of desire to avoid traffic coming through the centre of Dunnington.
I appreciate that. I don't think it's an unduly complicated point I'm making. I don't want an awareness or an understanding or a meeting after the event or a discussion. My proposal, which I'll put to a vote, hopefully all being well, because we seem to go around in circles, is that construction traffic should be conditioned not to come through the village. That's it.
Can't just have a condition that says it can't come through the village, because Eastfield Lane is clearly part of the village. So you would have to you would have to specify. I think what Councillor Watson says is the most appropriate way of approaching this would be specify what you thought was the route. The reason we don't specify normally the route for conditions like this is because there may be all sorts of reasons why construction traffic can't, make a particular turn, or there might be unknown weight restrictions, and we don't have the details at the time we're dealing with the application to go into that. So it's reserved for condition, and the various people. I'm not quite sure why you're shaking your head, Councillor.
Because it's absolutely ridiculous to suggest we can't do that route.
I'm not saying you can't do the route. I'm just saying you can't just say that. I'm just saying you can't just put a condition on saying you can't go through the village, because Eastfield Road is clearly part of the village. So if you, for example, wanted traffic to come down here, because that doesn't go through the village, then that wouldn't be possible, because that road won't take construction traffic.
So I don't want us to get into trying to design a route through or not through the village. That's not what we're here for, and it's not what we can do reasonably, I don't believe. Sandra, do you want to give any advice in terms of what we can and can't?
Yes, well, if it helps, Chair, just to remind members that there are legal tests for conditions, which include that they have to be reasonable as well as necessary. And as Gareth is pointing out, it may sometimes be necessary for traffic to take the route. And it may not be reasonable to completely just prohibit it by a condition, because it might make the development very difficult. So it might not be, sounds what Gareth is saying is this would not meet the tests for conditions, and it can be dealt with by technical highways officers who can deal with it through the discharge of the condition.
I'm comfortable if officers are happy that it would be possible to think about a little bit of amended wording that encompasses the spirit of what we're asking, which is about construction traffic to avoid the village. I personally don't feel that I know the status of those roads well enough to be able to say that I could draw and say, this is the way that it should go, this is the way it shouldn't go. And so I think that it wouldn't be appropriate for us as a committee to design a route. I think it is appropriate for us as a committee to say we want something that makes it clear that construction traffic should be avoiding going through the centre of a village wherever possible. I think that would be reasonable. Councillor Stewart, I'll give you one last shot, but then I don't want us to spend a lot of time on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to know what some of the examples are for where it wouldn't work. In terms of the point about through the village, I think literally, I might be wrong, but I think literally the phrasing through the village is used in the Copmanthorpe Tadcaster Road one. Literally, I think it's those exact 3 words. If it's not, though, perfectly happy with what Councillor Watson said about the, should be off the A166. I do know those roads. I mean, we're saying it should come in on Eastfield Lane. We're presumably thinking it should come in off the A166. That's one of the main routes through. At the bottom side, you've got the industrial estate. What are people thinking is going to be so shock horror bad at the top of that junction that would make the other route all the way through better? I don't understand. I'll put it to a vote, obviously at the appropriate time.
Well, Councillor Stewart, I'll decide when we're putting things to vote, sorry, if we're not, and I'm happy to come back to that. I'm also, like I've said, I'm happy to hear some appropriate wording that encapsulates the spirit of it, but I think we also have to heed the officer advice in terms of what is and isn't appropriate to go into a condition. Councillor Melly, did you have something to add?
Yeah, sorry, because I know we're at the point of asking questions, not offering opinions, but I do agree that the wording in condition 20 about vehicular access being from Eastfield Lane doesn't prevent someone from coming up, you know, that road that's down to the southeast through the village, then onto Eastfield Lane. But I do think the wording of condition 19 already maybe includes the spirit of it, because it does say that whatever arrangements are, you know, agreed for the routing of construction traffic are to ensure that development can be carried out in a manner that will not be to the detriment of amenity of local residents. So I think that the spirit behind that is that a route for construction traffic needs to be agreed that doesn't involve going through the village, and that's why this condition is in there. So I totally understand your concerns, and I think you're right to raise them, but I do think that spirit is already in that condition. It's already covered to my satisfaction.
Thanks, Councillor Melly. I think that's helpful. As I say, I'm happy to, when we get to the sort of end point, I'm happy to hear any proposed alternative wording, but I think I agree, Councillor Melly, that the spirit of it is covered there. Okay.
I think my reading of it is that is why condition 19 is there. That's why it's been included.
Thank you. Councillor Culwick, I had you on the list next.
My question is this: are there any concerns about a development on the scale? I know it's not a particularly large development, but still of some scale, with a single point of access in terms of safety. There's only one route in and out of this development. And although we can anticipate that the adjacent site will be subsequently developed, we can't guarantee that. That may not happen. Just looking at this application, there is only one way in and one way out. Are we entirely happy with that?
And it would need to be a significantly larger site for us to be concerned that there was only a single point of access. And we did grant planning permission. The previous site was 83 dwellings from a single access. I don't think we could revisit that principle on this particular application.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? In which case I'm happy to move us into debate, and just to remind members, not at this point looking for any proposals, and also there's no need to repeat everything that somebody else has said. If you fully agree with it, it's fine just to say I agree with Councillor X, Y, or Z. But happy to take any thoughts as to which way people are leaning, and anything that they think is worth discussion. Councillor Ray.
Put an end to the silence, at least. I think obviously the principle of the development, absolutely fine. I'm pretty sure I voted in favour of this when it was the 82. I think my concern is, as I mentioned in questioning, the reasoning for the split sites. And I know I appreciate that we don't have that answer, and we would always like to think the best of everybody, and that everybody's trying to achieve what's in the best interest. I tend to sit the other way around. I think there's been quite a few planning applications. I've been around a long time and seen things go the way that I particularly predicted. I take that on board the points about whether or not that is a reason to vote against. I think it actually is, because the policy is to deliver those affordable homes on the site, 24.9 affordable homes. We're losing a little bit on a percentage. We'll lose another little bit on a percentage, even if we get 30% of the next chunk in terms of that. So I think you probably end up on what was a policy of 24.9 at best, probably 23. I suspect the reasons are probably around the fact land acquisition is an issue, and I get that, but I'd be very surprised if there was a genuine proposal to get all of those sites built, that those land acquisition issues would have been addressed. I suspect there is something underlying that has led to the reason for this, and I do think that will lead to us not achieving the policy compliance here of 24.9 affordable homes. So I probably won't vote against it, but I think I might just sit on my hands and wait and see, and hopefully be proved wrong.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Eyre is right to have that thought, that we, you know, quite often see developers saying that they can't provide the even minimum amount of affordable housing that we expect because of the cost of bringing the development forward. And so it does seem a little bit of a strange coincidence if it is the case that there's one half that's more expensive to develop and one half that's less expensive. It might be the case that it would be, yeah, it might affect the affordability, but I don't think we have that information to base that decision on. I'm worried that this development might be quite car dependent. So it seems like there's quite a lot of car parking spaces per dwelling in private driveways and parking bays, and it looks like there may well also be on-street parking. And it's about, I think the paper said about half a kilometre to the nearest bus stop, which only has one bus service, which isn't the most frequent bus in the city. I think our guidance says that it should be more like 200 metres to the nearest bus stop and a maximum of 400. And given the village location as well, I'm concerned that the level of car dependency that's designed into this. But I think I'm satisfied with everything else. The home designs seem fine and the overall layout seems fine. I share Councillor Merritt's concerns about the low level of affordable housing. It just meets the minimum in terms of number of dwellings. We always measure it in terms of number of dwellings when calculating percentages, but it's so heavily weighted towards the smaller properties being the affordable ones and the larger ones being market value, that actually it means that if you base the calculation on something different, such as bedrooms, if you decide to measure housing by number of people housed, bedrooms would be probably a better measure, and then it's only 25% affordable. The smaller houses, which are already more affordable because they're smaller, are down as affordable, and the larger houses, which are out of reach of families, are not affordable, they're market value. So, but it technically is policy compliant, and that's what we're here to assess. So I agree with the officer recommendation to approve.
Okay. Not seeing anybody else itching to debate, so Councillor Vassie.
Yeah, just a point on reflecting on one of the observations that Councillor Waters made on condition 21. I do feel that he's got a point, and I would like to see, if this is approved, better clarity about the state of the roads when people are moving in. As it's currently stated, if I'm reading it correctly, no building shall be occupied until the internal road has been provided up to base course level. That would sort of suggest that some people might move into houses with inadequate roads. And I think Mark Waters' point was that it should be clear in the condition that no one should be moving into a home and occupying a home until they have a ready, properly constructed road surface to exit the development. So I'm just wondering if there could be more clarity in there to make it absolutely clear. I mean, there were points made about the number of exits and things like that. If people were moving into homes and they didn't have a properly constructed road surface, I would be very concerned. So can the wording just be tightened up to add clarity to that?
I think that would be a significant change to the way that developers bring forward housing sites. It is normally the case that people start to occupy houses that they've brought on development sites effectively, whilst the road is built to wearing course, because they don't want to, to base course, because if the development is still ongoing with heavy construction vehicles, then that wearing course wears out very, very quickly. So this is no different to the approach we would take on other sites. The way the condition is worded, sorry, just let me get to. Yeah, so that's the usual approach that you would build to base course, and then the wearing course goes on as the development is completed.
And is it normal for some houses then not to have a proper road surface for some time?
I think it's perhaps a misunderstanding of what the base course is. So my understanding of a base course is that to all intents and purposes looks like a road. It's a hard standing. It's not like a gravel or a soft surface. It's got to take heavy construction vehicles. It just hasn't got the final thin, fine tarmac surface, which is the wear course. So it would, to all intents and purposes, operate as a substantive road, but it won't have its final tarmac course and may not have line markings depending on what line markings are required. And I think on reading the condition, it's that once that base course has been completed, that sets a clock ticking that says the wear course has to be on within 2 years or before the penultimate house is constructed, whichever comes soonest. So I think the first occupier would have less than 2 years because the base course would have been constructed presumably before their first house was completed.
Okay, no disrespect to you, Chair, can officers just confirm that? Because if that is
absolutely.
the understanding, that's fine. Is that?
Yeah, that's my understanding of
Okay,
wearing courses and base courses.
thank you.
It's amazing the things you get into in planning committees, isn't it? Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I think I echo a lot of what's been said already. The split site is something which worries me hugely. The percentage affordable, which follows on, equally concerns me. I have to say it's an unimaginative layout and the buildings are unimaginatively designed. But at the end of the day, it's one of those applications which ticks the boxes, doesn't it? And so with a degree of reluctance, I will support it. I do think Councillor Stewart does raise a valid point. And what I'd suggest is that the power to finalise a condition rests with Chair and the appropriate planning officer to implement that which has been said, which is broadly speaking, access to the site should be from the 166 and not from the 1079. Thanks.
Okay, so that's a proposal to support the officer recommendation with that potential just tweak to wording. We've got somebody who's willing to second that. Councillor Melly? Thank you. Just in terms of that wording then, just before we go to a vote on it. So that particularly I think would relate to condition 19. I think an extension. An extension. I'm just wondering, and I appreciate what's being said in terms of the difference between condition wording and informative or otherwise. Noting the point that Councillor Melly made about the sort of spirit being potentially encompassed within that condition. On the reason at the end of that condition, if we just tightened that wording to make something specific about the desire to keep traffic out of the village, would that be sufficient to satisfy everybody that we'd covered it, whilst also taking advice that we've had from officers about what's reasonable to condition or otherwise?
I think the problem with spirits is that often they evaporate, don't they? The concept of directing construction traffic through a certain route is one which is frequently used on the planning consent, and as a matter of principle, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to use. I take on board the point that in any particular case, a final examination does have to take place in order to ensure that the condition which is going to be imposed is a realistic one in all the circumstances. I think I don't pretend to know Dunnington in minute detail. I do know it reasonably well, and the idea of bringing traffic off the 166 into the development site is not one which I would foresee as causing problems, but I do stand to be corrected, which is why I suggest it's done on a delegated power. And the wording should be something along the lines of construction traffic shall access the site via the A166 and not via the directly from the 1079. I don't know. Somebody's going to have to add to the wording there.
Did you want to make a comment there, Gareth?
Just going to make the comment that Because the recommendation is for a section 106 agreement, we have time to delegate the wording of that condition. We can investigate with housing officers and with the applicants how far they got in terms of agreeing the route on the previous consent. As Mark said, his understanding was it was the A166 and then Church Bulk and Eastfield Lane that was approved. So doing that through delegated powers, that wouldn't create a particular issue.
Okay. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Chair. I do find this very frustrating, as members might have gathered. We're obviously being clearly told that the A166 is the main route. So somebody made the point earlier about that might not be viable in some way. It's clearly nonsense because that's the main preferred route. Now in Copmanthorpe, I've been dealing with the situation as was presented with these deals that were done with the developers and things like the Spirit and the Hope. And I've been out there at 7:30 in the morning explaining to lorry drivers why they can and can't do things. I've gotten to change 2-inch laminate signs saying which way they have to go to 2-foot metal signs. I got them to put a bloke on the gate. It is embarrassing how little was done with the system as is. My point is very simple, not kicked away into some transport. And I don't doubt that when it's all is said and done, that's the wording we'll come up with about going from the 166. But we as a committee have so little power. We're going to lose more power nationally anyway. If we as a committee can't just say, we think that construction traffic should be conditioned to go from the A166, rather than it being take it away and check the routes for something that somebody, I don't know, somebody on whatever it's Holly Tree Lane might have unexpectedly extended their house over one side of the carriageway. I mean, what are we worried about? You know, why do we bother with making decisions if we don't feel we can make a decision like that? So I totally appreciate Councillor Watson's very helpful suggestions to take the wording forward. But my point is a simple one. This committee should condition construction traffic to come from the A166 or not use Common Road and not use Common Lane, I think it's, and not use York Road. And I'm just, honestly, if we can't have that as a bar, I don't honestly see why we're bothering.
Well, that's in members' hands. If members want to make that decision and feel they've got the justification for that, that's fine.
Councillor Melly.
I can see why this is difficult because it has to be, conditions have to be reasonable and practical and enforceable. And also there are rights to use highways, public highways. We can't just tell people that they're not allowed to use a highway. Maybe what the bullet point that says the statement should include at least the following information: the routing for construction traffic that will be promoted. Maybe we could just add to the end of that, avoiding the village where possible, or something like that. Like, I think all we can do as a planning authority is get the developer to promote a certain route and to direct traffic a certain way. I don't think legally we have the power to say you're not allowed to use this highway or that highway.
And that's exactly my point.
Right, I'm just going to interject.
You've answered that point, but hey ho.
Well, I'm just going to interject. Sandra, could you just give us a summary of what we can and can't reasonably do as a within a planning condition? Because what I don't want us to get into is spending an awful long time over what I think we all are broadly agreeing with, is that we want to try to enshrine in some way or other a route for construction traffic that avoids the village. I think that we're all on the same page with that. I think we just want to do that in a way that is proportionate and defensible. And then I'd like us to move into a position where we can just vote rather than going around in some circles. So I don't know if you can just give us a summary of what we can and can't do.
Conditions have to meet the tests for conditions, which include that they have to be necessary, enforceable, reasonable, related to development. I think reasonable in all other respects. I think the key issue here is whether it would be reasonable and necessary. I don't think officers are in a position to say or advise that it is both reasonable and necessary to ban a particular route at the moment, because we need highways input from that. Highways haven't requested such a condition. And it would seem to me that it's not really quite right to say that the reason for the condition is just goodwill and apple pie, because when that condition is being discharged, it has to be discharged taking into account the reason for the condition. So if the reason for the condition is that it's to protect the detriment, it's to ensure that the amenity of local residents is not impacted, then that would need to be taken into account when that condition is being discharged and the routing plan is being worked up. So that should give assurances that the reason for the condition is relevant to the condition.
I'm going to come to Councillor Eyre and then I will come back to you, Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, I think it's very brief because it's quite straightforward. It's a catch-22 system. If the applicant decides to take us to court to overthrow that particular condition that we've put on, then that proves that the condition was reasonable and necessary in the first place. Unless they intend to use different routes repeatedly, they're not going to challenge this condition and the expense it takes to challenge the planning.
Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, it's not looking for goodwill and apple pie. It's looking to reduce the risk of a small child on a bike being killed by an HGV. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. And I know very well the problems we're having with vehicles for all sorts of reasons. But in Towthorpe, we have a site run by Barratt, and HGVs can come through any way they want to that site. There are no constraints on it. And I don't have an issue with that because there's no logical way we could do that. You know, we could sort of say, unload your stuff into smaller vehicles at such and such point outside. It wouldn't be reasonable. That's not happened. We can't have that. This is about this. All the, Sandra, when you say about highways haven't been involved, we know they have been involved because we know they were talking what Mark said about the A166. We know that everything is about the A166 and they're likely to use the A166 and the A166 is the main road, etc., etc. But for some unknown reason, we can't just say, well, that's how it must be. We have to take it away to this in conjunction with looking at all, which therefore just leaves the option open. We have a black and white, whether it's enforced is a different thing, whole different conversation. In Towthorpe, for a site on the edge of the village, accessed by other ways, you cannot come through the village. This is exactly the same.
Okay.
Well, just to say, I don't know whether it is reasonable to attempt to ban all construction traffic of any type at all times. That may be not reasonable. The purpose of the condition at which highways officers will work up when they're discharging the condition, it is to promote safety. So they will have that in mind when they are finalising the route. But whether it's reasonable to ban all construction traffic at all times, that might not be reasonable or necessary, and therefore not meet the tests for conditions.
Okay, it's about the large vehicle. So it's not about a van with the site manager or something like that, right? And that's exactly what we've got in Tadcaster Road. So if we've done something unreasonable there, then I'm sure Miller Homes will be putting in a claim for all the money that they've spent complying and all the conversations they've had with me about it.
I think that the problem is you're already qualifying what you're wanting to say because you're saying it's about the large vehicle. I think we all agree in terms of the spirit. It's just about how we enact it. It seems to me that there's two options on the table. There is either the option to amend the wording of condition 19 to specify access only from the A166, or to feel satisfied that the condition is worded sufficiently to allow that same spirit to be enacted within the routing of construction traffic, which will also have to take place for the condition to be discharged. I think probably on that specific point, my suggestion would be that we just take a vote on whether or not to include reference within condition 19 specifically to access from the A166. And if we don't wish to do that, then we leave it as worded. But it's been quite clear from the discussion and from, officers have seen present that there is that expectation that the routing either way will avoid the village wherever possible. So my suggestion would be that by show of hands, we vote on all those in favour of it would probably have to be a deferral to chair and vice chair to finalise the final wording of the routing to be only from the A166. Would you be happy with that as what, or do you specifically want to? Well, tell me some wording that you would specifically like inserted.
Yeah, no, I particularly want it that this committee today says construction traffic should come from the A166.
But that's, so I need that in a, if you want to specify the wording that goes in the condition, I need the specific wording that you're proposing would go in the condition.
Okay, if you're talking about a wording about construction traffic only coming from the 166, I'm perfectly fine with that being chair and vice chair. Yeah, absolutely fine. If you're talking about
that was my proposal.
Yeah, okay. If you talk about that, I'm fine with that. Absolutely no problem at all with that, rather than being a particular wording. If you're talking about some sort of route, hypothetically, goes away chair and vice chair, I wouldn't be happy with that. But
okay, so that everybody's clear, because we've spent a long time on this. What I'm going to propose that we vote either for or against is to delegate to chair and vice chair in conjunction with officers to agree the final wording of condition 19 to include specific promotion of access from the A166. Does that encompass it? Okay, all those in favour of amending, I need a seconder for that. Councillor Stewart. So all those in favour of that proposal? Okay. Okay, all those against? And I'm abstaining on that one. So that is passed with that amendment to that wording. It's then been proposed and seconded. Councillor Vassie.
Just a quick reminder, Chair, that we earlier on in the discussion, officers agreed it would be possible to just tweak condition 7 to refer to overnight generators and stuff. Is that in it?
I've noticed it.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. So it's been proposed and seconded to support the officer recommendation with that amendment to the condition and with the there's an amendment within the update as well. And I think there's one or two other points that have been covered. So, Gareth, I'll invite you just to summarise what we were voting on.
Chair, so the recommendation is that permission be granted subject to the Section 106 agreement with the amendment that Chair and Vice Chair agree the amendment to the wording of condition 19 regarding construction traffic and traffic via the A166. There was the amendment to the kind of the wording within the condition 7, which is the construction environment management plan regarding the running of generators through the night. There is also, as part of the update, the additional planning obligation relating to the construction of the internal highway to allow access to the adjacent field. Was it?
Okay, so if I can see then by show of hands, all those in favour of that proposal. And anybody against that proposal? And any abstention? Okay, so with one abstention, that proposal is carried and therefore the approval is granted as outlined. I'm just going to very briefly, because there was 2 or 3 things that came up during the discussion there, which I think are worth just formally recording in the minutes with everybody's agreement. So there were concerns raised that we need to ensure that the local plan policy around minimum 30% affordable, but with the expectation that where it's viable to deliver more is properly explored, I think is probably the wording that we should use there. There's also been significant concerns raised around the enforcement of planning conditions, particularly in relation to construction management. So again, I just would like us to record that. And likewise, concerns raised again about whether or not the council is being proactive enough in seeking views from health partners around contributions on particularly strategic developments. I think they're the only ones that we can request health contributions on. And I think we also, and I'm struggling to get it from my brain because it was a while ago, we also talked about referring something to scrutiny or asking scrutiny to look at
It's the numbers of affordable delivered against the planned target.
so it's the current numbers of affordable houses delivered against the planned target and what that projection looks like
Yes.
in relation to meeting policy SS1?
SS1.
Yeah. Okay, so everybody's happy that I've summarised that in fair terms. Okay, so if we could just have them specified in the minutes, just so there's a record of them, that would be great. What I'm going to suggest that we do at just after 6:05 is we just take a short adjournment now before we move on to the next application. So if I could ask everybody to come back at 15:15, but please be bang on the dot of 15:15 so we can get going again. Thank you. Okay, welcome back to today's meeting of Planning Committee A. We're now moving on to agenda item 4B, which is the application at Piglets Adventure Farm on Towthorpe Grange, Towthorpe Moor Lane, Strensall. I'm just going to confirm that Councillor Stewart and Councillor Watson both previously declared an interest and have withdrawn from this part of the meeting. So if I could invite Gareth to talk us through the plans, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this planning application is a proposal to hard surface existing car parking areas within the Piglets Adventure Farm site. These areas, which are shown on the presentation, are currently a mixture of hard surfacing and grassed areas, but all are lawfully used or can lawfully be used for car parking. So just running through the presentation. So that the planning application site is that area outlined or infilled in red. The wider site is shown within the blue line of that, appears to disappear off. Isn't quite concluded on the northern side of the site for some reason. Some photographs of the car parking areas as they stand at the moment. This is the access track that, just go back and show you. So that's the access track that runs up the northwestern side of the site. This plan shows existing areas of hard standing within the application site, and then the additional hard standing shown in blue, and then there's a gravel area which on the landscape plan it shows a pedestrian access from the car parking areas into the park, into the main building itself. The landscaping plan. So this shows new hedgerows, tree planting, a sustainable drainage system, pond being proposed as well. There are some areas of existing hedgerow that are removed from the site. My eyesight allows me to see that there and a little bit along the northwestern edge of the site, and a couple of trees being removed, but vastly increase in the amount of trees and the amount of hedgerow being provided through this development. Drainage plan for information. There is an agreed drainage scheme. We did originally discuss with the applicant whether grasscrete was a proposal that could be used, but the ground conditions don't allow it. Wouldn't allow it to be. Wouldn't allow the site to drain properly and get over the main reason for applying for the surfacing of the car park in the first place. There we go. Okay, that's the end of the presentation.
Okay, any questions just in terms of clarity on what the plans are? Councillor Millie?
The papers say that there was a previous planning application, which is what allows this to be used for car parking, and that planning application also included pedestrian footpaths. Are all of those pedestrian footpaths to be retained? You showed us footpath that was specifically for walking from the car park into the building, but are there any other footpaths on site?
The application, the proposal also includes a new surfaced pathway. So once the visitors park up, they can then just take the pedestrian route into the site, which has been put forward as part of the application package, just to improve the safety and circulation of pedestrians as they enter the adventure park.
That's this,
Yeah,
this area here.
yeah.
So big parts in the car parking areas filter across. And they can walk up this pathway to the main building.
So it doesn't include pedestrian access to the site, it's only from vehicles within the site.
I don't believe there's any pedestrian access to the site in this location.
No.
There's no pedestrian access to the site given its location.
Okay. Not seeing further hands for further questions, so I can just invite Sharon. If there's been, I think, a small update, isn't there, on this?
Yes.
Yeah.
On the plans list, condition 7 has been deleted because it's felt unnecessary and unreasonable, as the proposal doesn't include the construction of a building. And then on condition 10, there's the drawing number should read at the end 1.3 revision C, and that is dated the 12th of August 2020. And one informative has been deleted. Informative number 3 to be precise.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move us then on to the public participation section of this hearing. We do have one person registered to speak, which is Sarah Sykes, who is a director at Piglets Adventure Farm. So if you'd like to come up to the table, on the microphone in front of you, you'll see a little button that looks a little bit like a Wi-Fi symbol, and if you press that, it'll go green. You have 3 minutes to address the committee, and then when you're finished, if you just sit where you are for a minute, I'll just see if there are any questions from anybody, and if you just want to start in your own time.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you. My husband and I are the applicant. We own and operate Piglets Adventure Farm. I just wanted to say that we endorse the committee report that has been put before you. Our proposal has been carefully considered by the officers over recent months, where we've had the chance to engage with the process along the way and clarify certain aspects. Crucially, as the report recognises, the proposed works are essential to overcome an existing problem whereby poor drainage has increasingly resulted in parking vehicles getting stuck in the ground. This impedes the efficient and safe usage of the parking area, as well as the smooth flow of internal traffic. It has also disgruntled many visitors to the attraction and deterred a few from visiting again. The proposed hardstanding and drainage works will solve this problem. At Piglets, the majority of our visitors have at least one child that is under 3 years old and often requires a pram or a buggy. This is a significant problem with the current operation of the attraction that needs to be resolved from a customer satisfaction approach and also for safety and convenience. The proposal also provides an opportunity to introduce new landscaping, planting and biodiversity enhancement to improve the character and appearance of the area. Here we would highlight that the site subject to this application is already used by visitors for car parking purposes, which has been acknowledged in a lawful use in planning terms, and parts of it already contain sections of hard standing. As such, we very much hope that you'll be in a position to support this much needed development in line with the officer's recommendation. On a minor technicality, we would just like to correct the reference to theme park contained in the first sentence of the report in connection with the use of Piglets Adventure Farm. This may imply that the attraction constitutes a type of amusement park that contains a series of mechanical amusements and rides. This is not the case. It constitutes a farm adventure park as recognised through a lawful development certificate issued by the council in 2023. Comprising a largely open outdoor attraction that is focused primarily on the display and grazing of animals, together with associated areas that are promoted for recreation, play, events and educational purposes. In closing, extending our car park isn't simply a matter of convenience. It's an investment in making our farm truly accessible to every family and group in our community. By providing safe, ample parking, we ensure that parents with young children, visitors with prams and buggies, and guests with mobility needs can arrive and depart with ease, allowing them to focus on the joy and learning that our farm offers. This will reduce roadside congestion, improve pedestrian safety, and support our year-round educational programmes, ensuring that our attraction remains a welcoming, well-run facility. So I'd like to urge you to endorse this application and help us to continue nurturing curiosity, compassion, and a connection in nature for every child that visits our farm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So any questions from anybody on the committee? Councillor Vassie.
Thank you. Yes, there's reference made to trees in the hedges between the rows of cars. I'm just keen to find out how you're envisaging those growing. Is the idea just to have hedges as separation points, or is the idea to have the trees grow? And I ask as someone we've probably all visited these sites on numerous occasions. And one of the things that is always of interest is when there's shade for your vehicle on sunny days. So there are multiple reasons for having trees. And I'm just keen to understand how you're envisaging the landscape looking in, say, 8-10 years' time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have many trees on the farm, many of which we have to get checked really regularly because we've got some really mature oaks along our drive. But the trees that are in the application that's been designed by the landscape architect are designed to come through the hedges. So the hedges have to be at a level that you can still kind of see beyond. But as far as I can gather from the expertise in the landscape architect we've used, the trees that will be within the hedges will be allowed to grow up and be able to provide some sort of shade. But yeah, hopefully they'll be mature enough so that in 8 to 10 years' time they are a good tree as opposed to just a little, kind of 3-year-old.
Okay, Councillor Merritt.
Yes, just a small question. Obviously, see the fundamental point of this application, but do you have any cycle parking? And its first question.
So many of our staff cycle to Piglets, so we have some very basic cycle parking for the team, but we would be more than happy to put some cycle parking in for our visitors. We don't have many visitors that cycle, just given the nature of the type of visitors that do visit us, but particularly our team, quite a number cycle.
Yeah. I'm certainly welcome that, except that 99% or 98% will be carbon, but for the 2% or whatever, having some place to securely park your bike is quite essential.
Okay, I'm not seeing further hands. I've just got one quick question, which is not really material to the application overall, but it's just mentioned in the report around landscape and setting, that part of what you're intending to do is to also add a small area of wildflower grassland meadow. And it says in the report that it's outside the site boundary. Now, I think that possibly means outside the application site boundary, but presumably within the sort of Piglets area, as it were.
Yes, yeah, I think it's 0.18 hectares that, to be honest, we're happy to plant any sort of we have lots of wildflower areas around the farm anyway. So I think it was a condition of about, I think the BNG credits came back at 0.18 hectares, and we're looking at putting that along the entrance field as you come in.
Right. That's great, thank you. Well, without anybody else wanting to ask questions, by the looks of things, thank you very much for your time this evening, and thanks also for waiting, sitting through the previous application. If you want to just take your seat back in the the gallery, and then we will continue. So we move now on to questions on the application report, on the update, on anything you've heard from the public speaker. If anybody has any questions for officers. It doesn't look like anybody has. So again, oh, apologies.
I just wanted to ask the same question to the planning officer, whether we can secure some cycle parking for visitors.
Crossed my mind, but I'm just wondering what because it's not a new development as in a new adventure park. It's an ancillary part of that development. So I was just scrolling through to page 294 of the local plan just to see if policy T1 provides a hook for that particular ask. With T8. Yeah, sorry about that. It's not exactly a spectator sport watching me read, but I can't see anything in policy T1 where I don't think we could hang that requirement. For example, we've got the policy for electric vehicle charging is specifically related to new car parks and new car parking spaces and having that provision, but there doesn't seem to be anywhere in our policy that says if you're providing a certain number of car parking spaces, that you have to provide a percentage of cycle parking spaces as well.
Could we put in an informative that we would welcome some?
So I was just wondering. Yeah, I think under informative number 4, which is talking about requirements to do with Control of Pollution Act, etc. I'm just wondering whether there's the opportunity there just to add summary informative.
I think it would be a separate informative. The Control of Pollution Act is about the construction of the development. So the gap created by the deletion of informative 3 could be filled by an informative about cycle parking if members saw fit.
And cycle parking that's suitable for various types of family cycles, tandems and trailers and.
Again, if members feel that's appropriate in this location, then.
I think my suggestion would be that if we could find a form of wording within the informative that allows for, I mean, I think it was indicated that it would be reasonably welcome. That allows for the provision of suitable cycle parking to allow a range of different types of cycle to access the site, or something along those lines.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So unless there's further questions, and given the lack of questions, I'm going to suggest that we don't need to go into any significant debate. I'm happy to take proposals alongside any discussion that anybody wishes to have. Councillor Merritt.
I'll move the recommendations for approval with subject to the additional officer amendments and the additional informative.
Okay, Councillor Coe.
Very pleased to second that.
Okay, does anybody wish to say anything further? Not seeing any hands, so I can move us then on to voting on that. So Gareth, if you could just summarise what we'll vote on.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendation is to approve the planning permission that's subject to a section 106 agreement for the biodiversity net gain monitoring, subject to the conditions in the report as amended by the updates and with the additional informative regarding cycle parking and including adapted cycles and family bike tandems.
Okay, so if I can see by show of hands, all those in favour of that proposal. That is unanimous, so that is approved. The only other thing that I will just briefly mention, which I should have raised before, but the public speaker just made reference to that first line of paragraph 1.1 and the reference to a theme. Obviously, they've made their statement in a public setting. I'm just wondering if there's anything that we could do just to amend that report in terms of its being a public record. I presume it's because there is an implication of whether something is regarded as a theme park versus a different type of park or recreational facility. I wouldn't want our reports to cause any future problem.
It's always something new. But I think it's the report is a report. It's the conditions and the document, the decision notice is a legal document. But I don't know about retrospectively changing reports. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't
there.
specifically want to retrospectively change it. It's just something just to formalise it. But
It doesn't. What it doesn't do is alter previous planning permissions and previous certificates of lawfulness. They are set as legal documents.
Did you wish to add something?
Well, Chair, yes, I don't think, as Gareth says, I don't think we can retrospectively alter the published report, but I suggest it could be minuted for the record. That is minuted that it is not a theme park.
Yeah, fantastic.
I think that's all
we
we
just
can
make
do.
sure that that's clear in the minutes. Yeah, that's brilliant. Fabulous. Right. Well, with no other business today, thank you all for your time this evening, and that concludes this meeting.